The man woke up in the middle of the night, the eerie quiet of the house pressing down on him like a heavy weight. He hadn't meant to fall asleep on the couch, but the exhaustion from the long day had consumed him. The flickering light from the TV cast strange shadows across the room, the hum of the machine filling the space with an unsettling presence. He blinked his eyes, trying to focus, the grogginess pulling at him like a fog. The last thing he remembered was the show he had been watching, a late-night horror series that, for some reason, seemed more disturbing than usual. He rubbed his eyes, attempting to shake off the lingering effects of sleep. The dim room seemed off, too still, the kind of stillness that made his skin crawl, like something was watching him from the corners of the room. As he sat up, the first thing he noticed was the TV. The screen that had been playing images just moments before now showed only static, the white noise filling the air like a distant, static-filled scream. The usual pattern of pixelated fuzz had overtaken the once comforting screen, and the sound was a harsh, insistent crackling. He frowned, reaching for the remote. His fingers felt cold against the plastic, but he pushed the buttons, hoping it was just a glitch, a common occurrence with older models like his. But the screen didn't change. It stayed frozen in that disturbing static, the noise rising and falling in eerie waves. He stared at it for a moment, then turned off the power. It didn't stop. The screen remained unchanged, flickering in time with the crackling sounds that seemed almost too loud now, too sharp. A cold sweat began to bead on his forehead. He stood up, his body moving instinctively toward the TV. He pressed the power button again, harder this time. Nothing. Something was wrong. His heartbeat quickened as the faintest unease began to settle into his chest. He could feel the tension growing, like the room had shifted into a place of discomfort. He could almost feel eyes on him, watching him from the dark corners of the room. Yet, no matter how much he tried to rationalize it, the feeling of being observed refused to fade. The TV, still emitting its chaotic static, felt as though it was alive. The air felt thicker now, oppressive. He took a step back, his eyes fixed on the screen as if it were pulling him in. The static pulsed in front of him, and something about it felt wrong, almost as if something were hiding within the fuzz, lurking just beneath the surface. His mind told him to walk away, to ignore it, but he couldn't. Someone was there. He could almost feel it in his bones. As he watched, the static shifted. It wasn't much, just a subtle change, but it was enough to make his heart skip a beat. There was a shape forming within the chaos, a faint outline, just barely visible, as if the static had taken on a strange, unnatural form. He squinted, trying to make sense of it. The shape grew clearer, and his breath caught in his throat. A face. It wasn't a clear face, not at first. It was faint, distorted by the ever-changing static, but it was unmistakably a face. Eyes, hollow and dark, stared back at him from the screen. The nose was an indistinct blur, the mouth a gaping, jagged line. For a moment, he thought he was imagining things, that his mind was playing tricks on him. But no, it was there, right there in the noise. The face seemed to twitch, moving as if it were alive, shifting ever so slightly. He took a step back, his pulse racing. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, an icy chill creeping up his spine. He couldn't look away. The face was compelling, its eyes drawing him in as though it were calling to him. But there was something wrong with it, something he couldn't put his finger on. The way the eyes seemed to follow him, tracking his every movement. The way the mouth twitched as though it were about to speak. A wave of panic washed over him. He took another step back, his mind telling him to run, to leave the room, but his legs felt heavy, his body frozen in place. The face remained in the static, its eyes never leaving his. For what felt like an eternity, they just stared at each other, the silence between them deafening. Then, without warning, the face shifted again. This time, it grinned. The grin was wide, far too wide, stretching across the face in a grotesque display of teeth. It wasn't a smile, it wasn't human, it was something much darker, something predatory. The eyes that had once been empty, hollow, now gleamed with something malevolent, something knowing. As if it understood the fear that was slowly overtaking him, feeding off of it. The grin widened further, stretching to impossible lengths. A sound, low and guttural, rose from the static, an unnatural growl that seemed to vibrate the air around him. His stomach churned, his heart pounding so loudly in his chest that he thought it might burst. He took a step back, then another, but his eyes were still fixed on the screen, unable to look away. He was rooted to the spot, unable to move, unable to scream. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the face vanished. The screen went black. For a moment, the room was silent, the oppressive stillness thick in the air. His breath came in shallow gasps, his hands trembling at his sides. He stared at the screen, waiting for something, anything to happen, but nothing did. The TV was off. The static, the face, the terrible grin. Everything was gone. He blinked, the world seeming to come back into focus. He was shaking now, his mind struggling to comprehend what he had just seen. It didn't make sense. It couldn't make sense. He had to be imagining things, right? It had to be some sort of malfunction, some trick of the mind caused by the exhaustion, the late-night show, the shadows. There was no way that could have been real. But as his eyes lingered on the darkened screen, a cold thought settled in his chest. It wasn't the static that was gone, it was the face. The face had left. But the eyes, those hollow, gleaming eyes, were still with him. And that was when the screen flickered back to life. But this time, it was different. The screen wasn't static. It was clear, a crisp, bright image filling the TV. It wasn't the show he had been watching before, or any channel he recognized. It was a camera feed pointed directly at him. The angle was off, as if someone had set it up in the corner of the room just out of sight. And the eyes were there again, staring at him from the screen, just like before. I'm unable to provide a text of that length all at once, but I can break it down for you into sections. Here's the first part of the main part of your story. The man stood frozen, staring at the screen, unable to comprehend what was happening. The camera feed was too clear, too real. There were no more flickering static or distortions, just a live image of the room, his room. He looked around, his eyes darting from the TV to the surroundings. Everything was exactly the same, yet somehow the atmosphere had changed. The room, once familiar and comforting, now felt alien and suffocating. The air was thick, heavy, as though something was pushing down on him from all sides. He moved cautiously toward the TV, unsure of what to do. His feet felt heavy against the floor, as though the gravity itself was changing. Each step was slow, deliberate. His eyes never left the screen, the feed on the TV showing every movement, every breath he took. It was as if the camera had followed him, anticipating each step he made. But there was no camera. He had checked every inch of the room earlier in his panic, yet this image was so real, so clear. The unnerving feeling of being watched deepened with every passing second. He reached out a hand, his fingers brushing against the cold surface of the TV. His heartbeat was loud in his ears, matching the frantic rhythm of his thoughts. He wasn't alone. It felt impossible to deny now. He glanced at the dark corners of the room once more, his breath catching in his throat. But everything remained still. The shadows were just shadows, nothing more. The TV feed had to be a trick, some weird glitch, an odd coincidence, a twisted prank. That's all it could be, right? There was no way that a sharp electric buzz filled the room, making him jump back, his chest tightening in fear. The feed on the TV had changed. The face. It wasn't just a presence now. It wasn't faint and blurry, hidden within the static. It was clear. It was staring right at him. And it wasn't just the eyes this time. The face. His face, or at least something that resembled it, was staring at him with an expression he couldn't place. It was too wrong. The features were stretched, unnatural, the skin too pale, too smooth, like something dead. The eyes were wide and empty, but there was something else in them now, something cruel. It felt as though the face was watching him closely, analyzing him. The grin from earlier, the grotesque smile, was there again. It seemed wider this time, more pronounced, as if it had grown, expanded, fed by some dark force. His breath quickened, his fingers trembling against the cold metal of the TV stand as he backed away. It didn't make sense. How was this even happening? He should have been panicking, running, calling someone for help. But instead, all he could do was watch, helpless and paralyzed. The face on the screen twitched. It was subtle at first, but undeniable. The eyes blinked once, then twice. The grin spread further across the screen. The thing on the TV knew he was there. It knew he was watching. A cold chill slithered up his spine, and suddenly he felt like he was no longer in control of his own body. His arms felt weak, his hands shaking uncontrollably. He had to get away from the screen. He had to turn it off. He had to make it stop. But every instinct he had screamed at him to keep looking, to keep watching, as though something in him was urging him to understand, to see what came next. And then the eyes blinked again. Only this time, they didn't just blink. They shifted, moved in an unnatural way. They seemed to focus on him as though they were following his every movement. He froze, a sickening realization creeping over him. The face wasn't just looking at him. It was reacting to him. His mind screamed for him to break free, to run, to do something, but he couldn't. His eyes were locked on the TV, the face growing ever more sinister with each passing second. The smile was wider now, too wide. The grin stretched across the distorted face like a jagged tear in the flesh, sharp and inhuman. He could see the teeth now, long, yellowed and serrated like those of a predatory animal. The mouth opened just slightly, and he could see the blackened void within, as if the very inside of its mouth was a bottomless pit. The eyes, those hollow, gleaming eyes, were fixed on him with an intensity that made his stomach churn. Something clicked inside his mind, something that he hadn't noticed before, but now it was impossible to ignore. The thing on the screen wasn't just watching him, it was mimicking him. It was copying his movements. Its hands twitched, fingers curling in rhythm with his own, its head jerking as he moved. And its grin, it wasn't just an expression anymore, it was a reflection of his own fear. It was as if the thing was feeding off his terror, drawing strength from it, growing stronger with every passing second. The static around the face began to shimmer, the distortion rippling like water. It was as if the very fabric of the screen itself was alive, the lines shifting and undulating with malevolent intent. The face contorted, its features warping in and out of focus as if it were struggling to maintain its shape. The expression twisted into something worse, something more disturbing, as if it were becoming aware of something terrible, something he couldn't see. The screen flickered once more, then went black. For a moment, there was nothing, no static, no face, just silence. The man exhaled shakily, his chest heaving with panicked breaths. He didn't know what had just happened, didn't know if he was still dreaming or if his mind had finally broken. He wanted to laugh, disbelief mixing with exhaustion. But there was no joy in it. He was alone again. He was alone with his thoughts and with the silence, or so he thought. Then the screen came back on, but this time it wasn't just the face. It was the whole room. The camera feed returned, and now it was showing him, his room, exactly as it had been. But there was something new, something wrong. The man didn't recognize the figure standing at the far side of the room, in the darkened corner by the window. It was too still, too motionless. It was a shadow, a vague shape, barely visible against the backdrop of the dimly lit room. But it was there, and it was watching him. He couldn't make out any details, only the shape, the outline of a figure standing perfectly still, its presence heavy in the air. His pulse quickened again. His eyes moved frantically between the corner of the room and the TV. The figure didn't move. It didn't even blink. It just stood there, staring at him. And then the figure began to step forward. At first it was barely noticeable, a slight shift in the shadows. But as it moved, it became clearer, more defined. The figure was tall, taller than any person he had ever seen. Its body was thin, impossibly thin, and as it drew closer, he could see that the face was obscured by a dark hood, the features hidden from view. It was the same face, he realized, the same one from the screen. It was no longer a distorted image of himself, no longer an unsettling grin. It was something much worse. The eyes, though, were still the same, hollow, cold, staring directly at him. The man's legs buckled beneath him, and he stumbled backward. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. The room was closing in around him, the walls pressing against him with a suffocating force. The figure was coming closer, its movements slow, deliberate, as though it were savoring each moment. And then, with a sudden jolt, the TV flickered again. The figure in the room had stopped moving. It was now standing directly in front of him, its face inches from his. The air around him felt electric, charged with an unnatural energy. The man's heart raced in his chest, the blood pounding in his ears. The figure's eyes were wide, unblinking, its grin stretching impossibly far across its face. It opened its mouth, but no sound came out. Instead, a low hum, like a distant drone, vibrated the air, the sound seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. The man opened his mouth to scream, but no sound came. His voice was gone. The figure's grin grew wider. It reached a hand toward him, its fingers long and unnaturally thin, and as it did, he felt something shift inside him. Something breaking, snapping, something that wasn't meant to be understood. And then the TV went black. The hum stopped. The room was silent once more, but the figure was still there, standing in the corner, waiting. It had never left. It never would. The man's breath was shallow, his body trembling uncontrollably as the silence of the room pressed in on him from every side. It was as if the walls themselves had turned to stone, the oppressive stillness becoming a living thing that wrapped around him, squeezing tighter with every passing moment. His mind was a whirlwind of terror, thoughts colliding with each other like crashing waves, each one more panicked than the last. The figure in the corner, the one that had come closer and closer, was still there. He could feel its presence, suffocating and cold, like an invisible weight pressing down on his chest. The TV had gone black. There was no sound, no movement, only the deep, unsettling silence that filled the room. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing in his ears as he fought to control the fear that threatened to tear him apart. His legs felt like jelly, as if they might collapse under him at any moment, but he refused to let himself fall. He couldn't. He had to stay standing. He had to keep fighting. But there was nowhere to run. The door was across the room, too far to reach. And even if he could make it to the door, what then? What was waiting for him outside? The figure, no, the thing in the corner, had a hold on him now. It had been watching him for so long, its eyes never leaving him, never blinking. There was nowhere to hide. And then, in the stillness, something changed. The air shifted, moving in a way that sent chills down his spine. The figure in the corner, it was no longer standing still. It was moving. Slowly, methodically, it took one step toward him, then another. Each step was deliberate, each movement precise, like it had all the time in the world. The man's pulse quickened, his hand shaking as he backed away, his legs stumbling over each other in his desperate attempt to escape. He couldn't run fast enough. The thing in the corner was closing in on him, its presence growing, suffocating. It smiled. The grin was wide and terrible, stretching across its face in a way that was not human, not even remotely. Its eyes, those deep, hollow eyes, burned with something dark, something ancient, and they were focused on him. The thing was smiling at him, but there was no warmth, no joy in it, only something worse, something cruel. His throat tightened, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he tried to scream, but nothing came out. His voice was gone, taken by the darkness that had enveloped him, by the nightmare that had become his reality. The grin grew wider, stretching to impossible lengths, and the figure's eyes glowed with a sickly light. It was no longer just an image, no longer just a reflection of something terrifying. It was real. It was here. And then the TV came to life again. The screen flickered, the static crackling like 1,000 voices all speaking at once. The white noise filled the room, a cacophony of sound that drowned out everything else. The man clutched his head, his hands pressing against his temples as the sound grew louder and louder. His heart raced, his thoughts a jumbled mess of panic and confusion. The TV screen shifted again, the blackness replaced by something else, a new image, something worse. The room was on the screen, his room, but now it was filled with shadows. The walls were shifting, their surfaces rippling like water, undulating in a way that made him dizzy. The light from the lamp by the door flickered and warped, casting strange, long shadows that stretched across the walls, twisting and writhing like living things. The furniture was all wrong. It was still there, but it looked different, altered, as if the very fabric of the room had been corrupted by something unseen. The colors bled into each other, the floorboards warping beneath the weight of unseen forces. And in the center of the room, standing tall and impossibly still, was the thing. The thing that had been waiting in the corner, the thing that had followed him. It was no longer just a shadow. It was fully formed now, its body long and thin, too thin, like it had been stretched to the breaking point. The face was even worse than before, warped and distorted, the eyes too large, too wide, their pupils black and endless. The grin was still there, stretching unnaturally across the creature's face, but now it wasn't just a smile. It was a gaping maw, filled with jagged, sharp teeth that gleamed in the dim light. The thing was smiling at him, and he could feel its hunger, its desire, its need to consume. The TV flickered again, the image on the screen warping, shifting in impossible ways as though it were alive, breathing, pulsing. The man's legs gave out, and he sank to the floor, his hands pressing against the cold surface, his mind swirling with dread. The figure in the room was closing in on him, its movements slow and deliberate, its eyes never leaving him. Each step it took was like a nail being driven into his soul, each movement more terrifying than the last. He could feel it now, the weight of its presence, the suffocating darkness that surrounded him, the terrible pull of the thing that was coming for him. But it wasn't just the figure anymore. The room itself had changed, had become something else, something alive, something hungry. The walls were closing in, the floor tilting, the ceiling pressing down. The air was thick with an unseen force, and the man could feel it in his bones, a low, vibrating hum that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was everywhere. It was in the TV, in the walls, in the very air he breathed. The thing was standing right in front of him now, its face inches from his own, its breath cold and fetid. He could feel its teeth, the sharp points of them just beyond his skin. Its eyes burned into his soul, and he knew, without a doubt, that it was going to take him, consume him, and everything he had ever known. There was no escape. There was no hope. And then the TV flickered one final time. The screen went dark. The room fell silent. The thing was gone. For a moment, everything was still. The silence was deafening, and the man didn't move. He didn't dare. He could feel his heart hammering in his chest, his breath shallow, as though he were waiting for something to happen, for something to change, for the world to crack open and reveal the horrors that lay beyond it. But nothing came. The room was normal again. The walls were solid, the air fresh, the light from the lamp by the door warm and steady. His pulse began to slow, his mind trying to process what had just happened, trying to make sense of the chaos that had unfolded before him. But then he looked at the TV. It wasn't off, it was on, and the face, that terrible face, was back. It was staring at him, its grin wide, its eyes gleaming with hunger. The static crackled around it, swirling like a storm, pulling him in. He could feel it again, that cold weight in his chest, that suffocating presence that had filled the room just moments before. The thing in the corner was still there, still watching, still waiting. The man's breath caught in his throat as the grin on the face widened even further. The darkness in the corners of the room deepened, and the air grew cold once more. The thing was coming for him again, its eyes filled with malice, its grin twisted in a way that was not human. The walls closed in, the floor tilted, the room shifted, and the man knew without a doubt that he was trapped. The face on the screen, the thing in the corner, the suffocating darkness, it was all one thing, one entity, and it had found him. He wasn't in control anymore. It had him. And as the darkness enveloped him once more, as the TV flickered and the static screamed louder, the man knew deep down that there was no escaping it, no escaping the thing that had followed him into this world. It was part of him now, part of his every breath, every heartbeat. And it would never let him go. The screen went black again.